Hey guys, tonight we're heading out past the edge of the map into a land where the wind scrapes dust against your skin, the sun bleaches every bone white, and the smell of sweat and horses clings to the air like a second skin. You're in the Wild West now, standing on a weathered wooden porch, outside a saloon whose swinging doors have seen more fights than baths. The street is lined with rough plank sidewalks and a single water trough where every horse in town drinks and, well, sometimes does other things. You can already feel the grit between your teeth, and you probably won't survive this without wondering how anyone did. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first cautious step into the dusty main street, and almost instantly, you notice it, the air smells layered. There's the sharp tang of manure from the livery stable, a whiff of sweat-soaked leather from passing cowboys, the faint rot from yesterday's garbage tossed behind the general store, and somewhere a drifting sweetness from a pie cooling on a windowsill. Though you can't be sure if the smell is from today or last week. It's a strange cocktail, and it's not accidental. This is Hygiene in the frontier towns of the late 1800s, a place where bathing is rare, laundry rarer still, and perfume, whether from cologne, pipe smoke, or just a sprig of wild sage tucked into a hatband, isn't about smelling good so much as masking the truth. Bathing here isn't just about having soap and water, it's about survival, or rather the lack of it. In a desert climate, water is more precious than gold, and even in the wetter territories, hauling enough to fill a tub takes time, muscle, and a sturdy back. You can imagine the process, the water pumped by hand from a well carried in buckets, heated over a wood stove, then poured into a tin or wooden tub that might be set up in the middle of the kitchen. By the time all that work is done, you've used up the better part of your day. And so most folks here make a choice: you wash up when you can, but you don't count on it being often. In fact, many Westerners bathe maybe once a week, maybe less in the colder months. And when you do bathe, it's not the private, relaxing soak you're imagining. In boarding houses, mining camps, or ranch bunkhouses, a single tub of water might be used by several people in turn, oldest or most important first, then down the line until the last poor soul is sitting in something closer to soup than bathwater. Soap, if you have it, is harsh lye-based stuff that can strip your skin raw. You rub yourself clean, but you also rub yourself sore. And because it's alkaline and often homemade, the scent lingers, not floral, not fresh, but sharp and faintly metallic. The laundries, if the town has one, are usually run by women who scrub clothes against washboards until their knuckles crack, or by Chinese immigrants who work day and night to keep up with demand. Shirts, trousers, and undergarments don't see the wash tub every day, sometimes not every week. Clothes get aired out, beaten free of dust, maybe brushed, but unless you're heading to Sunday service or a dance, you wear them as they are. And when dust is a permanent part of your existence, cleaning can feel almost pointless. Your hair, well, that's another story. Out here, people use whatever they can. Sometimes store-bought hair tonics, sometimes bacon grease or bear fat to keep it in place and out of their eyes. Washing it is a luxury, especially for women whose long hair can take hours to dry without a breeze or fire to help. And so head coverings become part of hygiene: hats for men, bonnets for women, not just for sun protection, but to hide the fact that your hair hasn't seen a wash in weeks. Teeth are a quieter problem. Toothbrushes exist, but they're expensive or handmade with bristles from pigs or horses. Tooth powder might be chalk-crushed charcoal or baking soda if you're lucky. Dental visits rare. You keep your teeth if you can, and you pull them when you can't. Bad breath is normal. Nobody mentions it. You glance around again and realize something important. The Wild West didn't just lack modern conveniences, it lacked the very idea that cleanliness was a daily virtue. Germ theory was still a novel concept, only just beginning to trickle into the minds of doctors and settlers alike. People believed more in bad air than in bacteria, more in the cleansing power of whiskey than in soap. And in some ways, they weren't wrong. Whiskey could kill certain germs, even if it also rotted your liver. As you pass the saloon, you see a man stepping out into the street, wiping his face with a kerchief. The cloth is more gray than white, and you have the sudden thought that this same cloth has probably been used for dust, for sweat, for wiping his mouth after a swig of beer, maybe even for a bloody nose after a fight. Multi-purpose, yes. Hygienic, no. But in the Wild West, practicality is king. You cross toward the hotel, noting the sign advertising hot baths, 25 cents. Inside the narrow hallway smells faintly of kerosene lamps and damp wood. The bathhouse is down the hall, a room with a tin tub, a small stove and a single bar of soap resting in a chipped dish. The water is hot if you're early, lukewarm if you're not, and you'd better be quick, other guests are waiting. This is the height of luxury in many towns, and you feel a little guilty for even thinking about how much cleaner you could be if you lived back east. And so here you are, dust on your skin, the dry taste of the prairie in your mouth, and the faint tang of sweat in the air. You're starting to understand that hygiene in the Wild West isn't about looking fresh or smelling nice. It's about doing what you can with what you have, and accepting that dirt like the horizon is just part of the landscape. You step back outside into the hard daylight, and the wind picks up enough to whip grit against your cheek. You squint, pulling your collar a little tighter, and you notice how every man, woman, and child around you has learned to move in a way that doesn't invite the dust to settle. They walk with hats tipped low, scarves, pulled high sleeves buttoned at the wrist. Not for fashion, but because anything exposed will soon be coated in a fine layer of dirt that will stick until the next wash, which could be weeks away. In the Wild West, dust is not just an inconvenience, it's an uninvited guest that settles into your hair, your bedding, your bread, and even your lungs. It shapes your hygiene whether you like it or not. You wander toward the livery stable at the edge of town. The smell hits you before you reach the doorway, a thick animal heat mixed with hay and manure. The floor is a packed layer of dirt, straw, and waste that's been swept aside but never truly gone. A stable hand, sleeves rolled, hands black with sweat and grime, is brushing down a horse. There's a small bucket of water nearby, but you can tell it's for the animal, not for him. His own wash will come much later, maybe at the end of the week, if he's lucky with a splash from a tin basin in the corner. You realize quickly that in the West, you might wash your horse more often than yourself, not because you care less about your skin, but because a healthy horse can mean the difference between life and death. You stop to watch him feed the horses, and as you lean on the rough stable wall, a flake of dried mud or something that was once mud crumbles under your hand. Your mind wanders to what happens when all this dust and sweat accumulates on a person. Skin chafes under clothing, sores form. If you're unlucky and without regular washing, small cuts can turn into something much worse. Out here, a simple infection is no small matter. Without antibiotics, the doctor in town might only have whiskey morphine and a bone saw for treatment. And so, hygiene is also about self-preservation. You keep yourself as clean as possible to avoid the sort of wounds that could end you. You wander on, and soon the sound of hammering draws you toward a cluster of shacks where laundry hangs stiff in the dry air. You see a woman bent over a wash tub, her sleeves wet up to the elbows, arms moving in a steady rhythm as she scrubs a shirt against the ridged surface of a washboard. Her face is streaked with sweat, but she doesn't pause. Water sloshes with each stroke, and you notice how little there is in the tub, barely enough to soak the fabric. She works carefully, using just enough soap to cut through the worst of the grime, then wrings out the shirt with practiced strength. She'll hang it in the sun to dry the light, bleaching away some of the stains. But you know the shirt will never be truly white again. Out here, clean is a relative term. Children run past you, bare feet, slapping the dirt road hair tangled into knots. They're laughing, but their hands are caked with dust, and their clothes are patched in half a dozen places. They've probably washed in the river last week, maybe yesterday, if they were lucky. Still, there's an earthy smell about them, a mixture of sweat, soil, and whatever they last ate. Their parents don't seem to mind. In a world where danger rides on horseback and hunger waits just outside the door, a little dirt is the least of your worries. You pass the blacksmith's shop and pause in the doorway. Inside, the air is thick with heat and the smell of burning coal. The smith's shirt clings to his back, darkened with sweat, and his arms glisten under the soot. He wipes his brow with a forearm, leaving a streak of black across his face. There's no washing station here, no soap, no clean towel, only a barrel of water outside for cooling metal or rinsing tools. When he's done for the day, he might dunk his head into the barrel, shake it off, and head home. Bathing will wait. By now, you're noticing a pattern. Hygiene here is dictated by necessity, not by routine. You wash when you can, and more importantly, when it's worth the effort. On the frontier, water isn't just for cleaning. It's for drinking, cooking, watering animals, and fighting fires. Every drop you spend on bathing is a drop you can't use for survival. So people ration it sometimes to extremes. As you wander toward the edge of town, you spot a small tent near the creek. Two men are kneeling by the water, splashing their faces and necks, laughing as the cold bites their skin. They're prospectors, judging by the pans and picks nearby, and they've just returned from days in the hills. Their clothes are stiff with sweat and dust, their beards tangled, but the simple act of rinsing off is enough to make them feel human again. You see how their eyes close, how their shoulders drop as the water washes away more than just dirt. It washes away the miles, the loneliness, the danger. Out here, hygiene isn't just physical, it's mental. You take a seat on a flat rock near the creek and run your own fingers through the cool water. You imagine dipping your whole body and feeling the weight of dust and sweat drift away. But then you notice the faint slick on the surface from where the men rinsed, and you remember that this same creek is where animals drink upstream and where laundry is done downstream. It's all the same water moving through every life in town. The sun is dropping lower now, casting long shadows across the ground. Somewhere behind you, the saloon piano starts up, and the faint smell of frying meat drifts on the breeze. But as you breathe in, you catch another scent: smoke. Not the comforting smell of a campfire, but the acrid tang of something burning in the open. You turn and see a pile of rubbish smoldering behind the general store, old rags, food scraps, broken crates, all going up in a plume that carries its own kind of hygiene. Out here, fire is a cleaner of sorts, reducing the waste of daily life into ash. It's not pretty, but it works. And as the smoke twists into the deepening sky, you realize that in the Wild West, cleanliness is not the absence of dirt. It's the careful balance of living with it, managing it just enough so it doesn't kill you before the land does. You decide to follow the curling smoke back toward the heart of town, your boots scuffing against the uneven boards of the sidewalk. The air is cooler now, the heat of the day slipping away, but the smells, those layered complex smells, remain. Somewhere a pot of beans is simmering over a fire, carrying a warm, earthy scent, but it mingles with the sour bite of unwashed bodies lingering at the saloon door. You notice how the locals don't seem to mind, and you start to understand why. In the Wild West, your nose adjusts quickly, and what once would have made you wrinkle your face becomes simply part of the background, a shared truth that no one bothers to hide. The saloon is alive tonight. Light spills through the swinging doors, and the sound of laughter, clinking glasses and boots tapping against the floor, drifts into the street. You step inside and are immediately met with the heat of too many bodies packed into too little space. The air is thick, whiskey tobacco smoke, sweat, and the faint perfume of a saloon girl leaning against the bar, her hair pinned up with more care than most women here can afford. Her dress is clean, or at least cleaner than the ones worn by the men around her, but even she carries the faint scent of the road and the long hours it takes to make a living in a place like this. You watch as a poker hand is dealt at the corner table. The players are a mix, cowboys still in dusty chaps, a traveling salesman with a stained collar, a rancher whose hat brim is dark with sweat. None of them seem to mind their own smells nor anyone else's. There's no expectation of freshness here. The best you can do is not be the worst. It's an unspoken code you don't need to smell like a field of flowers, but if you reek so badly that you turn heads, you'd better wash or be ready to sit alone. Behind the bar, the barkeep keeps a single rag draped over his shoulder. He uses it for everything, wiping spills, cleaning glasses, swatting flies. You notice it's not truly clean, but here clean enough is a category all its own. The glasses are rinsed in a bucket of water that's been changed. Well, you hope recently, but you suspect it's been used for hours. When you order a drink, you know it's safer to stick to something strong. The high proof might do more than take the edge off. It might just kill whatever's living in that glass. You wander toward the back of the saloon, past the piano player who barely glances up as you pass. At the far end, there's a narrow hallway leading to a small door with a faded sign, Bath, 50C. This is the kind of place where a hot soak is an indulgence, and you can imagine the process: one tub, one small stove to heat the water, and maybe a curtain for privacy if you're lucky. The water will be reused until it's too murky to bear, and then it'll be dumped out behind the building, joining the rest of the runoff in the dusty alley. The alley itself tells its own story. You step out into it, and the air is cooler here, but it carries the smell of waste kitchen scraps, spoiled beer, maybe worse. This is where the town's refuse collects, and without modern plumbing, much of it is left to dry rot or be burned. You notice the ground is damp in places, though it hasn't rained. Someone must have dumped their wash water here earlier. The faint scent of soap barely covering the underlying odors. Flies buzz lazily around the darker puddles. You follow the alley until it opens into the back street where the quieter side of town stretches out. Here the homes are smaller and the yards are dotted with rain barrels. You pause by one and peer inside. The water is dark, speckled with bits of leaves and whatever else fell from the roof, but you know this barrel is precious. In dry months, it might be the only source of water for washing clothes, rinsing dishes, or even giving a quick sponge bath. People here don't waste what the sky gives them. you spot a man sitting on his porch with a small tin basin at his feet. He's stripped to his undershirt, dipping a rag into the water and scrubbing his arms one at a time. It's not a bath in the way you know it, but it's enough to feel a little fresher before bed. He wrings out the rag, splashes the remaining water over his head, and leans back with a sigh. You realize then that for many out here, hygiene is measured not in degrees of cleanliness, but in degrees of comfort. A quick wash that leaves you feeling better is often enough. Night is closing in now, and the lanterns are being lit one by one. The flickering light makes the town look softer, almost cleaner. Shadows hide the dust, the stains, the smudges on the walls. You think about how darkness was its own kind of cosmetic in the Wild West after sundown. Everyone looked a little better, smelled a little less, and carried themselves as though the grit of the day had lifted just a bit. You make your way toward the edge of town again, where the road fades into open land. Out here with the stars overhead and the cool night air, you can almost forget the constant battle against dirt and smell. But you know that come morning, the cycle will start again. The dust will rise, the sweat will return, and the Wild West will keep teaching its quiet, stubborn lesson that survival comes first, and cleanliness follows only when it can. By dawn, the town is stirring again, and with the first rays of sunlight, the truth of the Wild West's hygiene returns in full, unforgiving detail. You watch from the edge of the main street as doors creak open, and men step out onto porches, stretching, yawning, scratching at stubbled chins. Some splash a little water from a basin onto their faces, rubbing briskly with calloused hands, then shake the drops away like dogs after rain. Others don't bother at all, heading straight to the livery or the saloon without so much as a rinse. Out here, morning routines are about function feeding animals, starting fires, getting to work, while grooming comes only if there's time to spare. The first stop for many is the communal water pump, a tall iron thing bolted into the ground near the general store. You wander over and see a woman filling a bucket, her sleeves already damp from the splash. Behind her, two boys wait with smaller pails jostling each other and sending bits of dust from their clothes into the air. The pump's handle creaks as she works it, and each gush of water splashes into the wooden trough below where stray dogs and the occasional chicken dart in for a drink. This water will be boiled for cooking, sipped straight on a hot day, and maybe if there's enough used for washing faces or rinsing hands. But the queue is long, and everyone here knows you take only what you can carry and no more. Across the street you notice a laundry line strung between two buildings with clothes hanging stiff in the morning chill. They're not white, not really. Most are various shades of beige, gray, or brown, even if they were once lighter. Out here, a clean shirt might still bear the faint outlines of old stains. Sweat at the underarms, dust around the hem, maybe a grease mark from cooking over an open fire. But the fabric smells of sun and wind, and that's clean enough for the West. You find yourself drawn toward the boarding house kitchen, where the scent of frying bacon curls through the air. Inside, the cook is bustling between the stove and the table, her apron smeared from yesterday's work. She keeps a pot of hot water on the back burner, not for tea or coffee, but for washing dishes once breakfast is done. You peek into the wash basin and see a thick film of yesterday's grease clinging to the sides. She'll scrub it out with a rag and a pinch of sand, the rough grit working better than soap to scour the wood and tin. When the dishes are clean, they'll be stacked to dry in the open air, the sun and breeze doing the rest. Stepping outside again, you see the blacksmith already at work, his hammer ringing against metal in a rhythm that carries through the street. A thin mist of sweat darkens the dust on his arms, and you know that by midday he'll be covered in soot again. He'll wipe himself down at the end of the day, maybe with water from the same barrel he uses to cool hot iron. Soap is optional, reserved for Saturday night or a special occasion. His clothes, too, are layered with the smells of smoke metal and sweat, a scent so common here that it's almost invisible. A few doors down, the barber shop is opening. You step inside, surprised by the relative freshness of the place. The barber, with his neatly combed hair and crisp shirt, prides himself on offering something rare in the West, a shave with hot water and a clean towel. You watch as he dips his brush into a small bowl, whipping soap into a fine lather. His razors gleam in the morning light, and the faint scent of bay rum fills the air. Customers come here not just for grooming, but for a taste of civility, a moment, to sit in a chair, close their eyes, and imagine they're somewhere cleaner, softer, safer. Still, even here, hygiene has its limits. Towels are reused until laundry day, and the comb in the glass jar of blue disinfectant may not have been rinsed as recently as you'd hope. Hair clippings sweep into a pile at your feet, mingling with the dust that sneaks in under the door. But the men leave looking sharper, smelling faintly of soap and cologne, and that's enough to make them stand out in the street. By mid-morning, the sun is already climbing, and with it the air thickens with familiar scents, the horse droppings in the street, the leather and sweat of saddles, the faint tang of kerosene from lanterns that burned through the night. You realize that the Wild West's idea of cleanliness is less about erasing these smells and more about layering over them. A sprig of sage in a pocket, a dab of perfume on a scarf, a cigar's curling smoke, they all work together to make life here smell a little less like work and survival. As you wander toward the outskirts again, you pass a small schoolhouse. The children are gathered outside for morning lessons, and you catch the scent of chalk dust and unwashed wool coats. They sit on rough benches, shuffling their feet in the dirt, their hands smudged from yesterday's play. The teacher, her hair pinned neatly under a hat, has a small basin of water at her desk. It's for the ink-stained hands that will touch their copybooks, but you suspect it also serves as a quiet reminder that even out here in a place where dirt is a constant companion, the habit of washing, however small, still holds value. The bell rings and the sound echoes across the open land. You stand in the doorway for a moment, looking out at the horizon. It stretches endlessly, a land where nature's forces wind dust, drought are always in charge. Hygiene here is not about conquering those forces. It's about finding ways to live alongside them without letting them win entirely. And as you step back into the sunlight, you understand. In the Wild West, cleanliness isn't a finish line. It's a moving target, always shifting with the weather, the work, and the will to keep going. By the time noon rolls around, the heat has settled over the town like a heavy blanket, and everything, people, animals, buildings, seems to move slower. You wander down the main street again, and the first thing you notice is how the sun bakes every smell into the air. The manure in the road turns sharp and pungent. The dust kicks up with every passing wagon, and even the sweet scent of the bakery drifts heavy, almost sour in the heat. Hygiene out here bends with the weather. What passes for clean in the cool dawn feels worn and wilted by midday. You pause near the trough outside the saloon. A pair of horses stand side by side, lowering their muzzles into the same cloudy water. One flicks its ears, sending a spray of droplets onto your shirt. This trough is as close to running water as most people see during the day, and it serves horses, mules, and sometimes even the occasional desperate man who'll cup his hands and drink. You think about the germs swirling in that murk, though most here wouldn't even use the word germs. In the Wild West, illness is blamed on bad luck, bad air, or bad whiskey before it's blamed on bacteria. From across the street, you hear the hiss of steam and see a thin plume of smoke rising from behind the laundry shop. Inside, the air is thick with heat soap and damp cloth. A young woman works the mangle, turning the heavy rollers to press water out of shirts and sheets. Her arms are bare skin, reddened from the hot water she's been hauling since sunrise. You watch her stack the clean laundry in neat piles, though you can still see faint yellowing at the collars and cuffs. She doesn't mind. Customers don't expect perfection, only improvement. Next door, the general store's porch is crowded with barrels and crates. You step inside and the air changes cooler, dimmer smelling of wood spices and lamp oil. On one shelf, you notice a small row of soaps, brown lye blocks, a few imported cakes wrapped in paper, and a tin of tooth powder. These are luxuries. A bar of soap might last a family months, carefully rationed. The tooth powder, likely a mixture of chalk and peppermint, is something most folks here might only see once or twice a year. You pick it up, shake it gently, and imagine the gritty taste on your teeth, the way it would scrape more than it would polish. You leave the store and head toward the telegraph office, where a small group of men lean against the wall, swapping stories. You notice the dark crescents of sweat under their arms and the streaks of dirt on their sleeves. One spits into the street, the brown tobacco juice soaking into the dust. Out here, spittoons exist, but the road is just as acceptable. Hygiene isn't just about washing, it's about habits, and some of those habits are as rough as the land itself. By early afternoon, the heat drives people indoors. You find yourself drawn toward the shade of the hotel veranda, where a few travelers sit in rocking chairs, fanning themselves lazily. One man removes his boots and rubs his feet, the smell hitting you almost instantly. His socks are stiff, more brown than white, but he doesn't seem embarrassed. In a place where you might wear the same pair for weeks, comfort wins over decorum. He tucks them back into the boots with a sigh, as if even the thought of washing them is too much work for today. Inside the hotel, you wander past to the dining room, catching the faint scent of soap, rare delicate, but there. You peek into the kitchen and see a girl scrubbing her hands at a small basin before slicing bread. Her sleeves are rolled high, and the water she uses is cloudy, already carrying the day's work in its swirls. Still, it's an effort, and in the Wild West, effort counts for a lot. Later, you step out the back door and find yourself in the service alley again. There's a wooden bench here with a small washstand, a pitcher, and a cracked mirror nailed to the wall. One of the porters is bent over, splashing his face and neck, rubbing vigorously before shaking off the water. He catches your eye and grins, water dripping down his chin. "Feels good," he says, and you can tell it's not just about the dirt. It's about the momentary relief from the heat, the quick reminder that he's still human beneath the layers of dust and sweat. Farther down the alley, you see a small coop where chickens scratch in the dirt. A woman is scattering grain for them, her skirts brushing the ground. When she stands, you catch the faint scent of wood smoke in her hair, the lingering trace of the fire she tends for cooking. It's not unpleasant, more like a part of her, a smell she carries the way others carry perfume. You begin to understand that here scents tell stories. A whiff of leather and dust might say ranch hand. The tang of coal smoke might say blacksmith. The faint sweetness of bay rum might whisper gambler or drifter. Out here, hygiene is less about erasing those smells and more about owning them. As the afternoon stretches on, you head toward the outskirts where a cluster of tents marks the camp of some passing travelers. A man kneels beside a small bucket, pouring water from a canteen into it. He dips a rag, wrings it out, and starts wiping down his arms. Another man nearby pours the last of his water into a tin cup, swishes it around his mouth, and spits it into the dust. They laugh about saving the rest for Saturday night, when they'll head into town for a proper bath, if they can spare the 50 cents. Until then, this quick piecemeal cleaning will do. You sit for a moment on a rock just beyond the camp, watching as the wind picks up again. The dust rises, swirling in lazy spirals before settling over everything once more. It's a quiet reminder, no matter how much you scrub, rinse, or shake off, the land always reclaims its own. Out here, dirt isn't an enemy you can defeat. It's a companion you learn to live with, shaping your habits, your comfort, even your sense of what clean really means. The sun dips lower, shifting the light from a harsh white glare to a warmer amber glow. You wander back toward the center of town where the day's work is winding down, but the air still hums with activity. From the open windows of the saloon, the faint tinkling of the piano drifts out, mingled with laughter and the deep rumble of men's voices. But before you reach the swinging doors, another sound catches your attention, the sharp rhythmic slap of wet cloth against a flat board. You follow it to a narrow yard behind a boarding house where two women are bent over a pair of wash tubs. They work in tandem, one scrubs, the other wrings. The water in the tubs is dark and soapy steam curling upward into the cool evening air. It's the same water they've been using since morning, and you can tell by the way they eye it that they're calculating whether it's worth dumping and starting fresh or pushing through one more round. Out here, fresh water is a luxury, and once it's heated, it's never wasted lightly. One woman pauses to stretch her back and wipes her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of wet soap on her temple. She glances at you and smiles faintly before going back to work, her hands red and raw from hours of scrubbing. You notice how her own dress is spotted with pale splashes from the tub, a quiet badge of the day's labor. Her hair, pulled back in a knot, carries a faint scent of lye soap and smoke. A few feet away, a line of laundry flaps in the evening breeze, shirts, petticoats, and sheets, each bearing the uneven shapes and faded colors that mark a garment well lived. You can see where sun and soap have fought stubborn stains to a truce rather than a victory. But the air here smells cleaner soap mingled with wind, a reminder that even small efforts against the ever-present dirt make a difference. You leave them to their work and drift toward the livery stable again, where a stable hand is brushing down a horse. The animal's flanks glisten with sweat, and its mane is tangled with burrs from the day's ride. The man works methodically, his brushstrokes slow and firm, the dust rising in soft clouds around him. His own shirt is streaked and damp, his face shiny in the low light. But the horse looks calmer with each pass, its breathing slowing. Out here, grooming animals is as much a part of daily hygiene as tending to yourself, sometimes more so. A well-kept horse can carry you to safety, find you work, or bring you home while your own dirt and sweat are just part of the job. Beyond the stable, a small bathhouse squats at the edge of town. Its wood is weathered and a painted sign hangs slightly crooked, hot bath, 25 francs. Inside, the scent of damp wood and soap hits you immediately, mixed with the faint, metallic tang of iron stoves heating water. The bathhouse keeper, a wiry man with rolled sleeves, moves between rooms carrying buckets from a steaming barrel to fill the tubs. You hear the low murmur of voices from behind a curtain. and the sound of water sloshing as someone sinks into the heat. Here, for a few precious minutes, you can pretend you live in a place where clean is more than a passing state. But bathhouses have their own rules. Towels are often shared or washed only after several uses. The tubs are drained and refilled when the water becomes too cloudy to ignore. You might leave feeling cleaner than you felt in weeks, but you also know the water's history, how many bodies it's touched before yours. In the Wild West, even cleanliness comes with compromise. As night settles in, lamps begin to glow in the windows of the small houses along the street. You pass one with its door open and catch a glimpse of a family gathered around a table. A basin sits nearby, the day's final washing taking place before the meal. The father dips a rag and wipes each child's hands in turn, then his wife's, then his own. The water is barely enough to darken the cloth, but the ritual is what matters, this small act, marking the shift from the day's toil to the evening's rest. Further down, a campfire crackles beside a wagon. A man sits with his boots off, rubbing his feet and sprinkling a little whiskey over the skin. It's not for drinking well, not yet, but for disinfecting a blister that's been rubbing raw all day. He grimaces, then chuckles to himself, wincing as the burn fades. You realize that out here remedies are as improvised as hygiene itself. Soap is scarce ointment, scarcer still, but a bottle of liquor can serve as a cleaner, a painkiller, and a nightcap all in one. The street grows quieter as the evening deepens. Somewhere behind you, a dog shakes itself, sending dust into the air. A door creaks shut, boots thump on a porch, and the sound of the piano fades as someone leans against the keys in a lazy final chord. The smells shift again, less sweat, now more wood smoke, more cooking. The day's work has been set aside, and with it, the day's dirt is either washed away or simply accepted until morning. Standing there, you realize that hygiene in the Wild West is a constant negotiation. It's never perfect. It's never finished. But it's also never meaningless. Every small act, a splash of water on your face, a shirt hung in the breeze, a comb run through your hair, becomes its own victory, however temporary, against the dust and sweat that rule this land. The morning after a rainstorm in the Wild West is a rare thing, but today you wake to a thin silver mist hanging over the land. The dust has settled into a thin crust, darkened and heavy, clinging to every surface. For the first time in weeks, the air smells faintly clean, not because the streets are spotless, but because the rain has pressed the smells into the ground instead of letting them float freely. You step out into the street and breathe in, knowing this freshness will last only until the sun climbs high enough to draw everything back out again. You walk toward the creek at the edge of town where the rain has swelled the water into a quick-moving ribbon. This is one of the few places where people can wash without paying for a bath, and you can tell by the damp footprints in the mud that you're not the first to arrive. A young man kneels at the edge, plunging his hands and face into the water, gasping at the cold. Beside him, a woman kneels with a bundle of clothes, beating them against a flat rock in a slow, steady rhythm. The water around her is cloudy with soap, and bits of lint float downstream, where another pair of women rinse their skirts. There's a kind of camaraderie here, even in the work. People laugh and talk as they scrub, pausing to wring out fabric or shake water from their hair. No one seems to mind the cold or the mess. This is one of the rare moments when hygiene feels almost communal, almost joyful. You notice the way a man stands off to one side, waiting his turn to wash his boots and shirt already off his skin pale where the sun rarely reaches. He doesn't speak, just watches the water patient and quiet. Out here, bathing is often a public act, and modesty takes a back seat to necessity. But even in this little gathering, there are limits. Upstream, someone has tethered their horse to drink. Farther up, you spot a pair of children wading their hands dark with mud from the riverbank. You realize with a twinge that this same water is used for drinking, cooking, laundry, bathing, and sometimes for dumping waste. It's a cycle that no one here can escape, and in that cycle, clean is a matter of perspective. Leaving the creek, you follow the sound of a hammer toward a small shack where a traveling tinker is repairing pots. His hands are blackened with soot, and his shirt is streaked with grease. You watch him finish a repair, then see him wipe his hands on a rag so dark you can't tell its original color. That rag will serve him for the rest of the day, cleaning tools, wiping sweat, maybe even polishing finished work. In a world where water is precious, the rag becomes the substitute for a full wash. As the day warms, you find yourself back on the main street, where a woman is sweeping her porch with short, brisk strokes. The dust she stirs rises in lazy spirals, catching the sunlight like tiny sparks. You notice a bucket at her feet, half full of cloudy water. When she finishes sweeping, she dips a cloth into it and runs it over the wooden railing, the boards lightening under her touch. It's a small thing, but it makes the entrance to her home feel more welcoming. At the corner, the doctor's office stands with its door propped open. You glance inside and see the doctor himself washing his hands in a small porcelain basin. The water is tinged pink from whatever he was working on before you arrived, and he tips it out into the street without hesitation. His tools lie on a towel beside him, and you notice that the towel has seen many uses, probably washed, but perhaps not as often as you'd like to think. Germ theory is beginning to take root in places like this, but old habits die hard. In the Wild West, the line between sterile and used but serviceable is often thin. By midday, the sun is high, and the temporary freshness from the rain has already faded. The smells are back: sweat, manure, smoke, but the dust is heavier now, clumping in the street instead of swirling in the air. You sit on a bench outside the mercantile watching people pass by. A cowboy rides past with a wet bandana tied around his neck, probably rinsed at the creek that morning. A pair of women walk by skirts brushing the ground, the hems already darkened from the damp dirt. Everyone carries the day's work on their skin and clothing, and no one expects it to be otherwise. As the afternoon stretches on, the heat pulls the dampness from the ground, releasing the scent of wet earth mixed with the sharper smells of the town. You wander past the blacksmith shop again and catch a whiff of smoke and hot iron. The smith is bare-chested now, his skin glistening with sweat, his beard damp at the edges. He doesn't pause in his work. Cleaning himself will come later, if at all. By evening, you return to the creek once more. It's quieter now, just a single man rinsing his hands, a couple of children chasing minnows in the shallows. The water reflects the gold of the setting sun, and you can see the fine silt drifting lazily in the current. You kneel, splash a little on your face, and feel the cool sting against your skin. For a moment, you understand why these small washings mean so much out here. They don't erase the dirt, but they remind you that it's possible, however briefly, to feel renewed in a place where the land seems determined to cling to you. The next day breaks hot, and still the kind of morning where the air feels heavy even before the sun is fully up. You wake to the muffled clatter of buckets against wood and step outside to see a boy from the boarding house hauling water from the pump. His small frame leans into the effort, each pull of the handle making the pump squeal. The bucket fills slowly, and when it's finally full, he carries it inside with both hands, spilling some onto the dusty boards. That water will be divided, some for cooking, some for the guests, to wash their faces, and maybe a splash for rinsing cups. Nothing here is ever used for just one purpose, if it can be stretched for two. You wander toward the back of the building, where a few guests are taking advantage of the cooler hours. One man has set a basin on a crate and is shaving with quick, practiced strokes, his face half covered in thick white foam. His razor glints in the early light, and when he dips it into the water, you notice it's already clouded with lather and hair. He'll use that same water to splash his face when he's done patting himself dry with a towel that's seen many mornings. His boots are off to the side, their cracked leather dusted with the pale residue of last night's road. Farther down the alley, a woman is scrubbing her children's faces. They squirm under the rough cloth, giggling and protesting, but she works methodically, forehead, cheeks, chin, before letting them run off barefoot into the street. Their hair is wild, but their faces are at least momentarily free of the day's grime. You get the sense she knows it won't last long, but the ritual matters more than the result. On the main street, the blacksmith's door is already open, the forge lit. He's pouring a small bucket of water over the floor, just inside the threshold, tamping down the dust before it can blow in. The steam rises in thin, ghostly tendrils, carrying the sharp, clean smell of hot metal and wet earth. You realize how many of the daily hygiene habits here are as much about controlling dust as they are about washing away sweat. At the edge of town, you find the barber shop bustling. The sound of the strop leather whipping under a blade fills the air. A man steps out with freshly trimmed hair and a faint scent of bay rum trailing behind him. It's one of the few smells here that feels deliberate chosen. Most scents in the West are byproducts of work or environment, but the barbershop smell is a signal, a mark that someone has, for at least a few hours, put cleanliness at the forefront. Across the way, the bathhouse has a steady stream of visitors. You slip inside and watch the keeper filling a tub for a new customer. Steam curls up from the water, and the man waiting to bathe stands with his hands clasped behind his back, shifting impatiently. His clothes are stiff with dried sweat, the knees of his trousers dark with dust. When the keeper finally nods him in, he disappears behind the curtain, and you hear the splash as he sinks into the water. It's not a long soak, too many people waiting, but when he steps out, he moves differently, his shoulders looser, his step lighter. You notice that he keeps wearing the same clothes he came in with. Out here, clean skin is a fleeting thing, but the memory of it lasts a while. Later in the day, you pass the general store again and see a new shipment being unloaded, barrels, sacks, and a small crate marked soap. The storekeeper opens it carefully, revealing neatly wrapped cakes with faint floral scents. These are imported luxuries meant for those who can afford the extra cost. Most people here make do with harsh lye soap, but these pale bars, soft to the touch, will be sold to the wealthier families, or perhaps the hotel where guests expect a little refinement. By mid-afternoon, the heat is oppressive. People retreat indoors, shutters half closed against the glare. You duck into the saloon for shade and find it quieter than usual. The barkeep wipes the bar with a damp rag, the smell of stale beer lingering in the air. He rinses glasses in a bucket of water that's seen better hours, then sets them upside down to dry. Even here, where business depends on a certain atmosphere, clean is a sliding scale that bends toward good enough. As the afternoon wears on, a breeze picks up carrying the dry scent of sage from the hills. You follow it toward the outskirts, where a group of cattle hands have set up camp. They're lounging in the shade boots, off washing their socks in a shallow tin pan. The water turns gray almost instantly, but they keep working, wringing out the cloth and draping it over bushes to dry. They laugh as they work, one man joking about how the socks might be stiffer after washing than before. Out here, even the act of trying to be clean comes with a sense of humor. By evening, you're back at the creek. A few travelers are bathing in the fading light, their voices low, the sound of water slapping against skin echoing softly. The sky turns rose and gold above them, and for a moment, the scene feels timeless, people gathered at the water's edge seeking relief from the day's heat and dirt. You realize that in the Wild West, hygiene is never just about cleanliness. It's about resilience, adaptation, and finding moments of comfort in a world that offers them sparingly. The next morning begins with the sound of boots on wooden planks and the distant clang of a metal bucket against the pump. You rise slowly, the air already warm, and step outside to see the street alive with early activity. Dust is lifting under wagon wheels again, and the faint tang of manure drifts through the air, mixing with the sharper scent of wood smoke from the first cooking fires of the day. In the Wild West, mornings are when you catch people at their cleanest if they've taken the time to wash at all. You wander toward the pump where a woman is filling a pair of buckets, her skirt brushing the ground. Her hands are red from the chill of the water, but she works quickly, keeping her eyes on the road ahead. A man waits behind her, hat in hand, with a tin basin tucked under his arm. You watch him take his turn, filling the basin halfway before setting it on the ground. He bends over, splashing water on his face, neck, and arms, gasping at the shock of cold. When he stands again, droplets cling to his beard, and for a moment he looks almost refreshed. Then he pours the rest over his hair, runs his fingers through it once, and walks away, leaving the basin for the next in line. As you follow the main road, you hear the rhythmic creak of a rocking chair and glance toward a porch. An older woman sits there with a small child in front of her, carefully combing through the girl's hair. The child winces now and then, but the woman works patiently, plucking out bits of dust and the occasional small insect that has made a home in the tangle. She dips the comb in a jar of water now, and then wiping it on her apron before continuing. Out here, this kind of grooming is as important as any bath. It keeps lice at bay and prevents hair from matting into thick ropes that are harder to clean. A few doors down, the butcher is sweeping sawdust across his floor, using it to soak up the drips from yesterday's work. The scent of raw meat lingers in the air, mingled with the earthy smell of the sawdust. When he's done, he'll sweep the whole lot into the street, where it will mix with the dust and manure already there. You realize that in a place like this, cleanliness often means moving dirt from one spot to another, rather than removing it entirely. You stop by the small schoolhouse where children are lined up outside, each holding a small cup. The teacher stands beside a rain barrel, dipping a ladle to give each child a drink before they head inside. Some splash a little on their faces before drinking, giggling at the cool sensation. Their clothes are rumpled and their shoes scuffed, but the ritual gives the morning a sense of order, a tiny act of renewal before lessons begin. By midday, the heat has settled in again, and people take refuge where they can. You pass the barber shop where a man leans back in a chair, eyes closed as the barber lathers his face. The scent of bay rum drifts out into the street, sharp and clean compared to the heavier smells outside. Inside the saloon, the barkeep has opened the back door to let in a breeze, though it carries as much dust as fresh air. He wipes the bar with a rag that's more stained than clean, the wood shining briefly before the next spill. Behind the saloon in the shadowed alley, a man squats with a bucket, washing his shirt in the runoff from a rain barrel. He works quickly, scrubbing the worst of the stains before wringing it out and hanging it over a railing. His undershirt is threadbare, and you can see the dirt clinging to his skin, but he hums as he works, content with the small improvement. Out here, better than before is sometimes the highest standard you can hope for. As the afternoon wanes, you head toward the edge of town where the bathhouse stands. A few men are gathered outside, waiting their turn, trading jokes about who will be last in the tub. Inside, you can hear water sloshing and the scrape of a chair being dragged across the floor. When a man emerges, hair slicked back, skin flushed from the heat. There's a visible shift in him, a straightness to his posture, a lightness to his step. For a few hours at least, he'll feel civilized in a place that does its best to strip that away. By evening, the street glows in the light of oil lamps, their flicker softening the hard edges of the day. The air is cooler now, carrying the smells of supper beans, bread, and roasted meat mixed with the ever-present dust. You pause by a doorway and watch a family inside, each taking a turn at a small basin on the table. The water darkens with each wash, but no one complains. They share the towel, hang it by the stove to dry, and sit down together, the day's labor washed from their hands, if not from their clothes. As you step back into the street, you realize that hygiene in the Wild West is never truly finished. It's a cycle of constant small efforts, enough to keep the worst at bay, never enough to erase the mark of the land. And perhaps that's the point. Here, a little dirt is a reminder that you're still part of the place, still surviving in a world that doesn't let you forget where you are. The morning heat rises early, as if the sun has no patience for subtlety. You wake to the sound of someone hauling a heavy bucket past your window, the metal scraping against wood with each step. Outside, the air is dry and sharp, carrying the scent of dust already disturbed by the first horses in the street. A few doors down, the pump is busy, men and women lined up with buckets, basins, and tin pails, each waiting their turn. The pump handle groans, water splashes into containers, and now and then a small child darts forward to cup hands under the spout for a quick drink before being shooed away. You move toward the livery, drawn by the soft thud of hooves on packed dirt. The stable hand is already at work, brushing down a horse that snorts and shifts under his touch. The man's shirt is damp with sweat, and bits of hay cling to his trousers. His hands, though strong, are blackened from the brush and the animal's hide. There's a water barrel nearby, but he ignores it for now, work first, washing later, if at all. Out here, there's no set order to when you clean yourself. It happens when time, energy, and water all align. Across the street, a woman is shaking out a rug over the railing of her porch. Each snap sends a cloud of dust billowing into the air, settling on the boards and drifting toward the street. She beats it again and again until the fabric looks lighter, though you know the fine dust still clings deep in the weave. She'll bring it back inside, satisfied enough. There's no such thing as spotless here, only less dirty than before. You turn a corner and spot the barber's shop, where a man in the chair is having his hair trimmed. The scent of bay rum carries into the street, mixing with the sharper tang of cut hair. The barber works quickly, pausing now and then to wipe his scissors with a cloth. You notice the towel around the customer's neck is a little frayed, faint stains ghosting the white. It's been washed, but the memory of past shaves lingers. Still, when the man steps out a few minutes later, his hair neat, his face smooth, he seems transformed, more confident, more at ease in his own skin. By midday, the street is quieter. The heat drives most people indoors, shutters half closed to keep out the glare. You drift into the saloon for shade and find a few men at the bar, hats tipped low, nursing drinks. The barkeep wipes down the counter with a rag, pushing crumbs and dust toward the edge before flicking them onto the floor. Behind him, glasses sit upside down on a shelf, faint smudges visible in the light. The water they're rinsed in stands in a bucket on the floor, its surface filmed over from hours of use. It's not pristine, but here good enough has long since replaced perfect. Behind the saloon, you catch the low sound of water sloshing. A man is crouched over a small tub, scrubbing a shirt with a bar of lye soap. His fingers are red from the harshness of it, but he keeps working, rubbing the fabric until the worst stains fade. When he's done, he wrings it out hard, the water dripping into the dirt at his feet. He hangs it on a rail where the sun will bleach it further. It will never be bright again, but it will smell faintly of soap and sunshine, 2 cents that count for a lot here. In the late afternoon, you walk toward the edge of town, where the bathhouse stands in its usual quiet dignity. A man emerges from the door, hair-wet shirt clinging to his back. He looks almost dazed, as if the simple act of sitting in hot water has loosened something deep inside him. You wonder how long that feeling will last before dust and sweat reclaim him. The thought reminds you of how temporary every act of cleanliness is in the Wild West, each one a small victory destined to fade. Evening brings a shift in the air. The scent of supper's cooking drifts from open windows, beans simmering, bread, baking meat roasting over fires. You pass a house where a family is gathered outside around a basin. The father kneels, washing the youngest child first, then passing the cloth to his wife. The older children take turns without complaint, each rubbing hands and faces before drying off on a shared towel. The basin water darkens quickly, but the mood is light, almost cheerful. You realize that for them, this ritual is less about removing every speck of dirt and more about marking the day's end together. When the lamps are lit and the street falls into shadow, you pause and take in the softened outlines of the town. In the dark, the grime of the day is hidden. The smells dulled the people, looking fresher than they did under the sun. Out here, the night itself feels like a cleansing, an illusion, maybe, but one the whole town seems willing to believe for a few hours. The morning comes with a low, steady wind that scatters dry leaves down the street and rattles the loose shutters on the hotel across from you. The air is cooler than it has been in days, and you notice the difference immediately, not in the scent, which still carries dust and smoke, but in how people move. There's less sluggishness, more purpose, as if the cooler air makes the chores of living a little easier. At the pump, the usual queue has formed. A ranch hand is filling a bucket, his hands cracked and darkened from days of sun and leather. He pours a little over his head, gasping at the cold, then shakes himself like a wet dog, sending droplets into the dust. The next in line, an older woman in a faded bonnet, fills her own bucket and turns to carry it back home. You watch her go, the water sloshing close to the rim, knowing some of it will be boiled for coffee, some for washing dishes, and maybe, if she feels indulgent, a quick rinse for her face. You head toward the general store, drawn by the sight of new barrels being rolled inside. The door is propped open, and from the dim interior, the The faint aroma of imported goods, spices, tobacco, even a few precious bottles of cologne spills out. On a shelf near the counter, you spot a small stack of fine milled soap wrapped neatly in paper. They look out of place here, fragile and clean, in a town where the air itself feels grimy. The shopkeeper sees you eyeing them and shrugs. For folks with money to burn, he says, or maybe for gifts. You imagine one of those bars kept in a dresser drawer, wrapped away like treasure, too valuable to waste on everyday dirt. Stepping back into the street, you follow the sound of a hammer striking metal and find the blacksmith deep in his work. The forge glows heat shimmering around him, and his shirt is plastered to his back. He pauses only to dunk a piece of glowing iron into the water barrel, steam erupting in a sharp hiss. You catch the scent of wet iron and charred coal, strong, almost overwhelming. If he's lucky, he'll wash at the end of the day with that same water, the faint metallic tang still clinging to his skin. Past the smithy, you find the barber's shop open early. Inside, a man sits in the chair having his beard trimmed, while a fresh towel warms on the stove. The barber dips his brush into a small bowl of lather, spreading it over the man's face in slow, careful circles. The scent of bay rum fills the small space, and for a moment, you could almost believe you were somewhere else entirely, a city. Perhaps where hygiene is less a battle and more a given. The towel, once wrapped around the man's face, releases a burst of heat and fragrance that seems to soften him from the inside out. By midday, the streets are quieter again. You drift toward the edge of town where the bathhouse sits with its door ajar. Steam curls lazily from within, and you step closer to see the keeper carrying a bucket toward one of the tubs. He nods in greeting, explaining that the morning rush has passed. Now is the best time to bathe, if you want hot water that hasn't been used a dozen times. The room smells of damp wood and soap, and the air is warm enough to fog the small windows. You think of how few places in the West hold this much clean water in one space and how carefully it's guarded. Later, you make your way to a cluster of small homes where laundry lines stretch between posts. Dresses, shirts, and underclothes sway in the wind, the fabric stiff from soap and sun. A young boy runs between the lines, his hands brushing the damp cloth. His mother calls out for him to leave them be, but she's smiling, and you can tell the sight of fresh laundry, however imperfect, pleases her. The hems still bear faint stains from mud or work, but they smell of the wind, and that's enough. As evening settles in, you find yourself outside the saloon again. The lamps have been lit, and inside the heat of bodies and whiskey thickens the air. You step in, noting how the scents layer on top of one another: sweat, tobacco, beer, and the faint perfume of one of the saloon girls passing by with a tray. It's not clean by any stretch, but it's familiar, almost comforting, like the town's own signature. When you step back out into the night air, the breeze feels cooler, the smells of the day softened into the background. The moonlight spills across the dusty street, silvering the edges of the buildings, and making the place look cleaner than it truly is. You realize that in the Wild West, night offers a kind of false hygiene, a brief, gentle disguise over the grit and sweat until morning pulls it all back into view again. The next day begins under a pale, washed-out sky, the kind that promises heat, but starts cool enough to lure people outside early. You step into the street and notice how quickly the town comes alive when the air is still fresh. At the pump, a boy is perched on the wooden frame, swinging his legs while his father works the handle. The father splashes water onto his own face before handing the boy a small tin cup, the cold water making the child laugh. They leave with the bucket only half full, water is heavy, and every drop carried home is a drop that must be rationed. You follow the sound of cloth snapping in the breeze and find a woman stringing laundry across her yard. She pauses to wring out a blouse, water dripping onto the packed dirt before pinning it to the line. The fabric is faded, the elbows patched, but the smell of soap and air clings to it, making it feel new enough for another week's wear. Her hands are red from lye, and her hair is tied back in a kerchief to keep the dust from settling while she works. Out here, laundry isn't just a chore, it's a small battle against the land's determination to claim every piece of fabric as its own. Down the road, the blacksmith's forge roars, sending a faint metallic tang into the morning air. The smith's arms shine with sweat, though the day has barely begun. He pauses to drink from a tin cup, pouring the last swallow over his head before getting back to work. For him, washing is less about removing all the grit and more about cooling his skin, keeping the heat from overwhelming him. Across the street, the barber's door is propped open, and you step inside to find a customer leaning back with his eyes closed while the barber lathers his chin. The soft rasp of the straight razor against skin blends with the faint clink of scissors in a jar. The air smells of bay rum and soap, and the warmth from the small stove keeps the room comfortable. In a place where most hygiene is a solitary, improvised affair, the barber's shop offers a rare, shared ritual of care. By midday, the sun sharpens and people retreat into the shade. You pass the saloon and catch a glimpse of the barkeep rinsing glasses in a bucket of water that's seen hours of use. He wipes the bar with a rag that's been folded and refolded so many times it's become a patchwork of stains. It's not spotless, but it's enough for the next round of customers. Behind the saloon, a man sits on a low stool, boots off, scrubbing at his socks in a small basin. The water turns gray almost instantly, but he keeps at it, wringing each sock and hanging it on a nearby fence rail. He glances up and grins as you pass, joking that they'll smell worse once they're dry, but at least they'll look better. In the West, humor often softens the reality that nothing stays clean for long. Later in the afternoon, you drift toward the bathhouse where a pair of men lean against the wall, towels slung over their shoulders. Inside steam curls upward, the scent of soap mingling with the faint musk of damp wood. You watch the keeper refill a tub, the water sloshing in generous waves. For a few precious minutes, the man inside will have the luxury of feeling completely immersed in warmth and cleanliness. But as soon as he dresses, dust will cling to his damp skin and the spell will break. Still, for those minutes, he'll remember what it feels like to be truly clean. As the day leans toward evening, you pass the small schoolhouse. Children are spilling out into the yard, their laughter loud in the cooling air. Some stop at the rain barrel to splash water on their faces or rinse their hands before heading home. The teacher watches from the doorway, arms crossed, a faint smile on her lips. She knows those small habits matter, even if the dirt will find them again before nightfall. When darkness comes, lamps glow. In windows, casting warm circles of light onto the dusty street. The smells of supper drift from every direction, beans, simmering bread fresh from the oven, meat roasting over fires. Families gather around small basins, passing the same cloth from one set of hands to the next. There's a sense of closure in these nightly washings, a signal that the day's work is done and rest can begin. Standing at the edge of the street, you realize something that's been building in your mind for days in the Wild West. Hygiene isn't measured by how clean you are at any given moment. It's measured by the rituals you keep, the small acts of care you repeat, even knowing the dust will win tomorrow. Out here, the fight against dirt isn't about victory, it's about persistence. The morning opens with a pale gold light spilling across the rooftops, the kind that makes the dust in the air look almost beautiful. You step out onto the boardwalk and hear the steady creak of the pump down the street. A young woman is there with two pails, her skirt hem dark from yesterday's mud. She fills each one halfway, then pauses to take a drink straight from the spout, wiping her mouth on her sleeve. She doesn't linger, water is too precious to treat casually, and within moments she's walking home, shoulders squared under the weight. You turn toward the livery and find the stable hand already mucking out the stalls. The air inside is warm and thick with the smell of hay manure and horse sweat. He works with a pitchfork, moving the worst of it into a pile at the far end. Every now and then he stops to swat at flies with the brim of his hat. When the stalls are cleaner, he brushes down each horse, sending more dust into the air than he takes away. Out here, cleaning animals is as much about keeping them healthy and calm as it is about appearance. And there's no escaping the layer of grit that settles over everything, including himself. Behind the blacksmith shop, you find a boy with a small bucket of water, splashing it over the packed dirt floor to keep the dust down. The steam rises where it hits the heat spilling from the forge, carrying that unmistakable blend of wet earth and hot iron. The blacksmith himself steps outside, wiping his hands on a rag already stained beyond redemption. He nods at you before turning back in, unconcerned about the sweat and soot clinging to his skin. He'll likely rinse off in a basin tonight, but for now the work takes priority. You wander past the barber shop where a man is leaning against the doorframe, running a comb through his damp hair. Inside, another customer is getting a shave, the low scrape of the razor mixing with the soft hiss of hot water being poured into a basin. The air smells faintly of bay rum and soap scents that in this town stand out sharply against the ever-present background of dust and livestock. For a few minutes after they leave, these men will carry that clean smell like a badge before it fades back into the common air. By midday, the heat begins to push people indoors. The saloon is dim and cool, though the smell inside is heavy stale beer, cigar smoke, and the musk of men who've been working since dawn. The barkeep wipes the bar with a damp cloth, folding it over and over to hide the dirtier side, and rinses a row of glasses in a bucket of cloudy water. A woman passes by with a tray, her perfume cutting briefly through the haze before it too blends into the mix. Behind the saloon, you see a man kneeling by a rain barrel, rinsing his hands and arms. He splashes his face once, then stands back, letting the wind dry him. His shirt is streaked from the day's work, but the cool water has brightened him, somehow, eyes clearer, movements looser. Out here, even a brief wash can change the way you carry yourself. Later at the edge of town, you come across a small encampment where travelers have stopped for the night. A pot of water sits on the fire, heating slowly. One man uses a cup to pour the warm water over his head, rubbing his scalp with both hands before shaking it out. Another dips a cloth into the pot and wipes down his arms, passing the cloth to the next person without comment. It's a shared understanding that every bit of warmth and water is to be used and used again until it's gone. As evening falls, the wind shifts, bringing with it the scents of suppers, cooking beans, onions, fresh bread. In several homes, you see the nightly ritual of washing. Before the meal, hands plunged into a small basin, faces wiped with a damp cloth, the towel hung near the stove to dry. The water may be cool, the cloth coarse, but the act is grounding a signal that the day's work is done. You stand at the edge of the street as the lamps are lit, the glow making the dust seem softer, the air almost gentle. The smells of the day, the sweat, the smoke, the animals fade into the background under the hush of night. And you think about how in the Wild West, hygiene isn't about defeating the dirt once and for all. It's about these small, stubborn rituals repeated each day that keep a person feeling human in a place that constantly threatens to wear that humanity away. The next dawn comes quietly, with a pale stripe of light cutting across the horizon and the smell of last night's campfires still lingering in the cool air. You step outside, boots scuffing against the dusty boards of the sidewalk, and hear the faint squeak of the pump handle already at work. A man in a wide-brimmed hat is filling a bucket, his breath clouding faintly in the chill. He pauses to take a long drink, then tips a little over his head, rubbing the water into his hair before it can trickle down his back. The gesture is quick, almost casual, but you can tell it's as much a wake-up ritual as it is an act of hygiene. You follow the street toward the edge of town where the first rays of sunlight strike the laundry lines. Shirts, trousers, and petticoats sway in the morning breeze, their damp fabric catching the light in patches. A woman works among them, turning each garment to face the sun. The hems are frayed, the colors faded, but the smell of soap, sharp and clean, threads through the air. She works with quiet precision, pinning and unpinning, and you realize that for her, this is not just about washing clothes. It's about setting her home in order, making something neat in a world that rarely stays that way. Back near the center of town, the barbershop's door is open. Inside, a man sits in the chair with a towel draped over his shoulders, eyes half closed as the barber works a fine comb through his beard. The clink of scissors against the counter is rhythmic, almost soothing. The barber moves with practiced ease, finishing with a splash of bay rum that sends a clean, crisp scent into the air, a scent that momentarily cuts through the heavier smells drifting from the street. You watch the customer leave, chin lifted, the faint gleam of a fresh shave catching the morning light. Down by the livery, the stable hand is grooming a pair of horses. The animals stand quietly, ears twitching, as he works a stiff brush over their coats. Dust rises from the strokes, settling on his shirt and hat. But the horses look brighter for it, their manes falling neatly along their necks. He pauses only to wipe his forehead with a forearm, the gesture smearing dust into the sweat already there. His own cleaning will wait until the end of the day, if it comes at all. By midday, the sun sits high, and the streets take on that slow, heat-drenched rhythm you've come to recognize. People walk with shorter strides, seeking shade wherever it falls. At the saloon, the barkeep leans over the bar, polishing a glass with a cloth that's seen hours of use. The air is thick with smoke and the faint scent of whiskey. You know that most of the glasses here are rinsed in the same tub of water until it's finally emptied, then refilled. It's not the kind of clean you'd find in the cities, but it's the standard here enough to keep the dust and grit from your lips. Behind the saloon, in the quieter shadow of the building, a man sits with his boots off, rubbing his feet with a damp rag. His socks are hanging over a railing, steam rising faintly from them in the heat. He nods when he notices you explaining with a wry grin that they'll be dry before the dust comes back in. Out here, the victory isn't in staying clean, it's in getting clean again, however briefly. As the afternoon light shifts toward evening, you pass the bathhouse. Steam spills from a cracked window, and you catch the muted sound of water pouring into a tub. The keeper stands outside, smoking a pipe, his shirt damp at the collar from the humidity inside. He tells you they've had a rush of travelers today, dusty from the road, eager for a soak before heading on. The thought of them stepping back into the same dirt they've just washed away makes you smile because you've seen it enough to know it's not pointless. Even a short escape from the grit matters. Night settles with a kind of softness, the air cooling enough to invite people back into the street. Lamps glow in windows, their light spilling onto the dusty road in warm, uneven pools. Families gather at doorways, passing basins and cloths between them in the final wash before bed. The smell of wood smoke drifts over everything, mingled with the faint sweetness of baking bread. And for a few hours in the shadows and lamplight, the west looks almost clean. Its rough edges blurred, its grit hidden until the morning pulls it all back into sharp relief again. Morning comes quietly, with a pale mist clinging low over the rooftops, and the sound of roosters echoing from somewhere beyond the edge of town. You step out into the street and feel the cool air on your face, a brief reprieve before the day's dust begins to rise. Down by the pump, the first few townsfolk are already gathering. A man in work-worn overalls leans over to fill a bucket, then splashes a little onto his face, rubbing the water through his beard. He looks up with a half smile, as if refreshed enough to take on whatever the day brings. You walk past the livery and catch the sight of the stable hand tossing fresh straw into the stalls. The air smells faintly sweet from the new bedding, though it's already mixing with the heavier scent of the horses. He pauses to brush one animal's neck, his hands moving in steady circles, lifting a fine haze of dust into the morning light. Grooming here is its own form of hygiene, one that benefits the person as much as the beast, even if it leaves both still marked by the land. In the middle of town, the barber shop is open, the rhythmic sound of a strop cutting through the still air. Inside, a man sits back as the barber trims his mustache with slow precision. The sharp scent of bay rum lingers in the small room, clinging to the wood, the towels, the barber's own shirt. For a few minutes, that clean, bright smell pushes away every trace of the outside world. You watch as the customer leaves, stepping into the dust, with his head held a little higher, knowing the feeling will last until the wind reminds him where he is. The saloon is still quiet at this hour, but the barkeep is already at work, rinsing glasses in a fresh bucket of water. The rag he uses to dry them is worn thin, but in the early morning light, the bar looks almost polished. In the kitchen, a woman is scrubbing yesterday's pots with a mix of sand and water, the rough grit scraping away the grease. The smell of coffee drifts through the air, sharp and bitter, promising the day's first comfort. You make your way toward the bathhouse where steam curls out from under the door. The keeper is carrying a bucket toward a waiting tub, the wood floors damp from countless footfalls. A man sits on a bench, outside towel over his shoulder, his clothes folded neatly beside him. He nods as you pass, and you know the look in his eyes, the anticipation of warmth, of sinking into water, deep enough to close over your knees, of feeling the grit loosen and float away. He'll emerge cleaner, lighter, but still very much of this place, the dust waiting for him just beyond the door. As the sun climbs higher, you wander toward the outskirts where a small homestead sits. A family is gathered outside, each taking turns at a single basin. The mother washes the youngest child's face, then hands the cloth to the eldest, who wipes her own hands and arms before passing it along. The water grows darker with each turn, but no one hesitates. It's not about perfection, it's about the ritual, the act of marking the transition from morning's quiet to the labor ahead. By late afternoon, the streets are alive again, the dust swirling up under wagon wheels and boots. The smells of the west smoke, sweat, animals cooking, return in full force, layered and inseparable. But now you see them differently. You understand that out here, cleanliness is never a fixed state. It's a moment, a pause, an act of defiance against the constant pull of the land. And maybe that's why it matters so much, because each wash, each rinse, each small effort is a reminder that even in the roughest places, people will always try to carve out a little space for comfort, dignity, and the feeling, however brief, of being new again. So here you are, standing at the edge of the main street as the evening settles over the town. The light has gone soft, the air cooling with each minute, and the day's noise is giving way to the quieter rhythms of night. Lamps glow in windows, their light catching in the dust still hanging faintly in the air. You can smell the last of the suppers, cooking beans thick in their pots, bread cooling on wooden tables, the faintest sweetness of pie if you catch the breeze just right. Around you, the small familiar rituals of the West play out one last time before bed. A man leans over a basin, splashing his face in the lamplight. A woman wipes down her kitchen table with a damp cloth, the same one she used to wash her children's hands an hour earlier. Somewhere down the road, laughter drifts from the saloon, warm and easy, as if the grit of the day had been shrugged off like a coat. You know now that out here hygiene isn't about chasing perfection. It's about finding small ways to feel human in a place that constantly reminds you how close you live to the edge. A bath, a clean shirt, a splash of water over the face, these are not just about removing dirt. They're about reclaiming a piece of yourself from the dust and sweat and unrelenting work. The Wild West doesn't stay clean for long, and maybe it was never meant to, but that doesn't stop anyone from trying. And in those moments when the water is cool, the soap is sharp, and the air smells briefly of something other than the road, you understand exactly why it's worth the effort.